by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the LRPC web pages, the county's events calendar, and the email notifications sent to LRPC or zoning committee email subscribers. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. Okay. For commissioners joining virtually, if anyone loses internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you're called upon. Turn sound off to any other devices around you to minimize interference. For attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off the video feed. I will address it when it is appropriate to turn it on in a moment. Our meeting chat, the meeting chat is to serve two purposes: to assist participants who need technical support and for participants to pose brief or clarifying questions to a larger audience. While the clarifying questions will be monitored, they will not be formally acknowledged, and staff may address these comments as appropriate. The Teams chat should not be used for discussion or inappropriate statements. Those who are planning to provide public comment may do so only at the end of the meeting, as the chat cannot be used for that purpose. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record. And of course, for all of us in the room, please just a quick reminder to please speak up, speak slowly, speak clearly. I think we're pretty well equipped with microphones. But if folks on the Teams call cannot hear us, just let me know and we will make sure to make adjustments. So those who are participating virtually, commissioners participating virtually who wish to be recognized to speak at an item, please turn your video feed on and raise your virtual hand in Teams, and we will monitor the feeds to make sure folks are called upon. Do we have any commission members or committee members who have joined us by phone today, who are only by phone? Don't think that's the case. But if folks do, I will verbally check in to make sure that you are recognized. Okay. A few additional notes. Unlike the Planning Commission's regular meetings or hearings, I should say, LRPC agenda items are not public hearings, and therefore public comment is at the chair's discretion. We'll let you know. I always prefer to have public comment if we can accommodate it. We'll see if anybody has signed up. But if you'd like to provide public comment, you can also do so by indicating as such in the chat. That is my strong wish to do so if folks attend. So we will take a look at the chat as the meeting goes on, and I will let folks know how much time we have left to do so. I will call for speakers at the end of the meeting after committee discussion has concluded. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by in-person attendees. Speaking time allotted will depend upon the number of speakers we have this evening, although don't know if we're going to have that many. We'll see. Virtual attendees, please indicate in the chat if you'd like to provide comment. I already said that, and we will acknowledge your request. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your meeting command bar. We don't have the ability to unmute you, so you need to do that yourself. And you will be muted when your time has concluded. Alternatively, you may provide public comment on the public comment form posted on the LRPC webpage. And again, this is a public forum, so tonight's meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the county website. And all information associated with tonight's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. Okay. So the question for you, Natasha, is whether you think we can proceed. Currently only have 2 planning commissioners in person.
Right. Is there a way to communicate with anyone that we know are coming in person?
Yeah. Yep. So here's what I'm going to do. full disclosure for those on the phone. I'm going to put the meeting on mute. I'm going to text the planning. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. I see Commissioner Sarli, and he will be our quorum.
Yep.
It's an exciting start.
Did everyone sign in just to make sure at the front, if you don't mind?
Yeah. So take a pause and sign in. So now that we have Commissioner Sarli, we can begin.
You can sit right there.
You don't want to come on.
That's advice.
So
Elevated to co-chair.
exactly. Okay, if, while you folks are doing that, I'll let Olivia kind of queue up the presentation here. So the next item would be the staff presentation.
Tasha, are you able to make this full screen so there are no notes? You're sharing, right? So when you're, I think the way you're presenting.
It can only see the thing outlined in red.
Right. But I think you want the whole group here to also see what's just that, right? I don't know how you do that from here, because I thought.
There we go.
There we go. You right clicked on it?
I just, the three dots there, just said hide presenter view. I need to.
So I guess with LRPCs, we've traditionally had folks go around and introduce themselves.
You can do that?
Yeah, so we will be, since we don't have that many folks, we're gonna do that briefly, and then we'll give Olivia a minute to get things going. So we're gonna go around to introductions. I will start in the room, and then we will go to the 11 folks on the phone. So again, I'm Eric Berkey. I'm a member of the Planning Commission. Commissioner Weir and I co-chaired the Land Use Analysis Working Group, and I am chairing the LRPC for this tonight. I'll go to Commissioner Sarley.
Hi, I'm Leo Sarley. I'm with the Planning Commission.
Tuzak with the Planning Division, County Staff.
David Hildy with Gyro Lynch.
Lauren Radcliffe, Walsh Kulichi, representing Gyro Lynch.
I'm Jill Barker with the Parks and Rec Commission.
Ted Gilbert, Planning Commission.
David Howell, Forestry.
And I'm Melissa Danowski with the county's Housing Division.
Olivia Sontag with the county's planning division.
Jim Lantelme, Planning Commission.
Natasha Alfonso also with the Planning Division.
Jean Hensroth, President, Leeway Overland Civic Association.
And Bob Benson with the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission. David is the representative.
Excellent. And I see Kristen. I'm gonna pick on you first. We'll go to folks on the Teams call. So we'll start with Kristen, then we'll go around.
No problem. I'm Kristen Culkins, DES Transportation.
Folks could just chime
Robert
in.
Gibson, Arlington County DES Transportation.
Jeremy Smith, Arlington County Department of Parks and Recreation.
Greg Ward with Gyro Lynch.
Nia Bagley, Planning Commission.
Pam Van Hyde with Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
Anyone else? All right, we'll move forward. Are we ready for the staff presentation?
Yes.
Excellent.
All right, good evening. I'm Olivia Sontag with the Planning Division. We have about 40 slides to share with you this evening, so we are going to try to move as quickly as possible. Matt Matuzak and I are kind of divvying up those slides, so we'll move through them quickly. But we'll start out again with some background just for anyone in the room who's not familiar with the acquisition of the site and some of the work that's been going on since the acquisition. We'll then move on to the working group process, which took place between February and May of this year. Cover some of the elements that are included in the Master Financing and Development Plan, some of the policy recommendations that have come out of this working group process, and then the remaining schedule for the year. So to start out, just to orient everybody, the Barcroft property is located kind of between Columbia Pike, South 4 Mile Run, George Mason, and it also includes that tail that's bisected by 16th Street, as well as the what we call the Penske site up on the corner of Columbia Pike and George Mason Drive. So it's approximately a 62-acre site. It was developed in 8 sections between 1940 and 1950, and 2 different phases. The first phase is kind of the section that you see on the left-hand side of the screen, which includes that kind of South Thomas historic spine all the way down through the tail. And then the second phase is the kind of blue, yellow, and greenish gray color up on the corner of Columbia Pike and George Mason Drive. So it contains a total of 1335 housing units, primarily 1 and 2 bedroom units today. So some background about the acquisition. It was listed for sale in the fall of 2021. It was risking the displacement of many residents. So both Arlington County and Amazon provided loans to Gyre Lynch for the purposes of purchasing the property. As a result of the acquisition, the affordability of those 1335 units was preserved for 99 years, up to 60% AMI, resulting in no displacement of those residents. Additionally, rents were frozen in 2022 for residents living at the property as of December of 2021, and annual increases, which began in 2023, are capped at 3%, up to a maximum of 60% AMI. Additionally, in December of 2023, Gyre Lynch and the county have agreed to meet deeper affordability needs and commit to deliver at least 10% of units as affordable to households earning up to 30% AMI. So also in the background, while this long-term planning continues, Gyre Lynch has advanced 4 neighborhoods form-based code renovation projects. These are all located within existing conservation areas consistent with the existing vision for the site, and these are not envisioned for redevelopment. So those 4 renovation projects in process are shown on the slide, and they include a total of 15 garden apartment buildings totaling 359 committed affordable units. The 4th use permit was just reviewed by the Planning Commission last week and will go to the county board this weekend. And these renovations will help to deliver some of these upgraded units in the near term, which is the reason we're kind of proceeding ahead of some of these other policy updates that we're making. But they include in-unit washer dryers, renovated kitchens and bathrooms, new mechanical systems and HVAC units, repaired and replaced roofs, outdoor amenity areas that are kind of more programmed, and then type A accessible units and ADA parking where it's feasible on the site. So as part of this, we had to identify different objectives for this land use analysis process that would take place in the first half of the year. So one of the first objectives was to both build upon and update the existing adopted visions for the Barcroft property, which include the neighborhoods area plan, but also the revitalization plan, which helped to support and this land use analysis would help to support all of the financing and affordability plan that was approved by the board in December of 2023. We also wanted to take a look at existing and new tools to ensure that the commitments to site improvements are clearly documented and that they can also be successfully implemented as part of the future phasing strategy for a property of 62 acres. Next slide. So to do so, we formed a Barcroft working group and kind of embarked on this 4 or 5 month process to review the existing Gyre Lynch proposal and provide feedback. So this group consisted of the core form-based code advisory working group membership, which is chaired by the planning commissioner, Commissioner Weir, and includes representatives from 10 different civic associations along Columbia Pike, as well as the Columbia Pike Partnership. It also included key commissions, representatives from these key commissions and committees listed on the screen. I won't read them all, as well as community organizations, including the Barcroft Resident Council. And then alongside this public engagement process, it included staff review of the Gyre Lynch proposal from CPHD, from our Department of Environmental Services, as well as our Department of Parks and Recreation. slide. So in January of 2023, we first proposed this working group process to the county board, who supported this approach. So we started with a kickoff meeting in early February. We also started an online feedback form and some pop-up events to get feedback both from residents of the property, but also the surrounding community. We then, on a kind of 3 weeks in between each of these meetings, embarked on exploring 4 different topics of the Barcroft property, starting with identifying the conservation area limits and redevelopment areas, then moving on to transportation network and parking, then the public open space and natural areas, and finally urban design and transitions from new development to the conservation areas. We then held an open house for residents in the broader community at the Barcroft Apartments property on May 4th to just gather additional input on the proposal. And then finally, the final working group meeting, we shared all updates. The Dry Lunch team shared their updates based on feedback from the working group process and from staff and the open house and online feedback forms at the May 13th meeting. And then the next slide will show you what we've been doing since May 13th. So we've been working to address all the feedback we received at that final working group meeting. And then Jar Lynch has been developing this master financing development plan to capture all of that analysis and a number of different elements. Staff has been working to finalize all of the policy updates that have resulted from this process, and also to kind of forecast some of the schedules for the second half of the year and different topics that will be discussed in the fall. So here we are at the June 10th LRPC meeting. This kind of kicks off this commission roadshow where we're going to start reviewing these draft updates to the neighborhoods area plan and to the revitalization plan. We'll also be reviewing updates, proposed updates to the GLUP and to the MTP that reflect all of those changes that we're making in the neighborhoods area plan and revitalization plan. And then also review the master financing development plan from Jar Lynch. So these are the commission groups that will be visiting over the next approximately month, leading up to the county board meeting in July, which will again consider 3 actions, including adoption of those addendums to the 2 plans, authorizing advertisement of the GLUP and the MTP changes, and then the county board needs to approve Jar Lynch's master finance and development plan. So the master finance and development plan is still under review by staff. We can move to the next slide, and will continue to be reviewed over the course of this next month. However, we wanted to give you, explain what an MFDP is, because this is the first time that the county is reviewing something like this. So due to the level of investment and the magnitude of development, and multi-phasing on the site, it was determined that an MFDP would serve as a tool to document the affordable housing financing plan, phasing plan, and then the vision for site redevelopment. The document isn't regulatory, and there will be amendments to the form-based codes in the second half of the year to implement the vision that's outlined in the MFDP document. So the affordable housing financing plan was approved in December of 2023 and includes an outline of how the county acquisition fund will be paid down, how county loans will be reallocated as each phase is renovated and redeveloped. It also includes commitments, for example, to rent stabilization for current residents, as well as that provision for the 30% AMI units across the property. It also includes an anticipated phasing plan of when buildings will be renovated and redeveloped, and then information about the process for on-site resident relocation and how those residents will be notified. And then the third piece, which is kind of more of the focus for this evening, is the site redevelopment plan. which covers the entire property, shows which portions will be preserved and which will be redeveloped, where those future improvements will be located, any changes in streets, parks, pathways through the site. And then it'll also include documentation of details like tree canopy targets, the building height transition, site-wide improvements, and other commitments that have been made by the Jar Lynch team. So as part of this process, we've established planning principles to help identify values that should guide decisions on future changes for the Barcroft Apartments property, and also help interpret some of the intentions of broader county policies for the site as they apply to the Barcroft property. So these principles are also unique to each of the 4 topics that have been covered at the Barcroft Working Group, and are beyond the commitments to preserving affordability of the 1335 units for 99 years. So I won't go through and read these, but we can go back and revisit them later in the meeting if needed. So similarly, the MFDP addresses each of these topic areas, which are also reflected in some of the accompanying exhibits, which will in just a minute. But you can see here some of the specific elements that are embedded within the conservation area limits and redevelopment areas, such as the preservation of the historic entrance to the site off of Columbia Pike along South Thomas Street, how emphasis has been placed on preservation and enhancement of that historic spine, the intent to register Barcroft as a historic district, the location and intent for the resident amenity center, and then expansion of development opportunities as part of the analysis of where these conservation area limits were relocated. And also the multimodal transportation network and parking, including any changes or thought to the vehicular circulation, bike circulation, PED, and the parking approach. For urban design, it highlights the consideration of topography throughout the site, how building height discrepancies in the existing code were addressed, how we're transitioning building heights in conservation areas, and then ensuring design compatibility throughout the site, especially within those transition areas. For public open space and natural areas, it also highlights kind of the intent of the East Node open space, which includes a central green, how that space might be programmed in the future, screening that might be considered, and then an added mini park that's over, it's now proposed over on the Penske site across George Mason Drive, as well as the West Node open space. Similarly, just considering the central green, in that case also the topography, the unique topography on that location, preserved natural areas on the site, biophilic pedestrian paths, and then tree canopy targets. So this just kind of explains how the MFDP relates to some of these other items that will be considered by the county board. So we have the comprehensive plan elements, including the GLUP amendments and the master transportation plan amendments that'll go to the board in July. These will reflect all of the changes that we're showing, that we're proposing in the Columbia Pike planning documents, which is the neighborhoods area plan and the revitalization plan. And then again, in the background, we've been reviewing some renovation use permits. These will be continue to be considered on an ongoing basis, and they do include condition language to ensure that development of those sites is consistent with the MFDP and these any of these policy updates. We'll also, in this next half of the year, begin to consider development use permits for the site. So we'll move through these exhibits fairly quickly, but this is a reflection of Jar Lynch's proposal for the site, and it does reflect all of the input from the working group and from staff over these last about 6 months. So I'll highlight a few things here. It's a little bit difficult to see on the screen, But where you see the purple hatching, that's areas where the conservation area has been enlarged. And I think the important part to point out here is that they've enlarged these areas to again focus on that historic South Thomas Street spine, preserving that whole area. And they've then in turn kind of swapped out areas on the eastern portion of the property to create development opportunities over there to balance out that conservation area change. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a little bit more clearly where some of those proposed development areas are proposed, including the Penske site across the street. Don't want to keep forgetting about that one. All right, next slide. So these plans also reflect changes in the transportation network. We'll start with the street changes on the right-hand side of the screen. So probably most notably here, this includes a connection from Columbia Pike. See, there's a missing South Taylor Street connection. There we go. Between Columbia Pike and 12th Road. So that connection is being introduced, as well as the connection across the street onto the Penske site. And then we also have a new connection proposed that continues 12th Road all the way down to Wakefield Street. And then on the proposed bicycle circulation area, this shows some of the planned MTP bike facilities and also some of the proposed bike lanes, including 12th from 12th Street to along 12th Street from George Mason to South Thomas, and then also from Thomas to South Wakefield Street, the bike or the facilities along Wakefield Street, and then also the facilities that run along 4 Mile Run Minor all the way to the W&OD Trail. Next slide. So this highlights the existing parking supply and the proposed parking supply that will remain to support the preserved areas. And then this just highlights that those new building development pads will meet their minimum parking requirements within their internal garages. Slide. So here what we want to focus on is the changed location of the open space. It's moved 2 in the plan and the vision documents to 3 different spaces, totaling 1.3 acres, spread across. I don't know, Matt, if you can kind of move the mouse over those locations. So 1 in the east node there, and then another in the west node, and then the 3rd over on the Penske site. They've also proposed to preserve some of the existing envisioned, call them preserved natural areas. Those are in the light green areas. And then they've also proposed where some of those preserved natural areas have been lost due to some of the redevelopment design. They've recaptured those in the darker green areas on the screen. And on the right-hand side of the screen, this is where some of these biophilic connections are being proposed that'll have kind of enhanced treatment, reflection points along those areas, and just enhanced lighting and different features through those portions. And then moving on, I believe this is the last one, to building height and transitions. This reflects the approach to building height on the site with these new development areas that have been proposed. So you can see the numbers on the screen, where primarily 6 stories are being proposed adjacent to conservation areas. Where there's no street proposed in between the conservation areas and the new development, there's a 3-story transition area. You can see just faintly along those borders there. But then primarily fronting some of the main streets, we've got 8 stories transitioning to 10 and 14 stories when we get over to South 4 Mile Run. slide. This is just a visual, a rendering looking southwest from George Mason and Columbia Pike into the site. Southeast from 4 Mile Run and Columbia Pike, where some of the tallest heights will be. Oh, and then northwest across the site. And we can go back and revisit these again. All right.
That was the fun part of the presentation, just set expectations.
We'll swap on Wednesday.
So as we were reviewing all of the work and proposal elements in the MFDP, what we're obligated to also evaluate is how do those align with all the different policy documents that we have in place, some of which were used to develop the original vision for Columbia Pike and Barcroft, and some of which have either since been created or updated since it's been at least 10 years since the latest Columbia Pike plan came forward. So what we've done over the last 4 or 5 months is kind of group these in a way where those that are shown in black here were used to inform the review and in many cases led to some adjustments in the proposal, but they themselves were not updated as a result of it. They generally represent countywide guidance. There was no need to really refine them any further, and they serve their purpose in this process. The 4 up top in blue, however, are specific enough that any kind of even minor, certainly substantive changes to the vision for Barcroft are detailed so specifically in all 4 of those. Such changes do need to be updated if the MFDP is going to go forward and be considered by the board. So these 4 specific elements we're going to go through over the next few slides and give you a sense of what exactly is changing and what might stay the same. So as we do that, it's also important to highlight where has the proposal actually changed. And I think if you'll notice, in many cases exceeded that original vision, whether that's the extent of preservation, the biophilic gestures throughout the site, the street connectivity, pedestrian connectivity, bicycle facilities, and really just general alignment with what we have countywide guidance to offer and utilize in our review. So this is kind of a before and after existing versus proposed comparison. What it doesn't highlight is, I think, some additional areas where we've had a network of planned streets. We're still getting that. It's slightly reconfigured. Olivia mentioned kind of some of those changes. But this table would just continue to keep going if you really wanted to capture every single thing. But this gives you a sense of more or less why there's a need to update a lot of these planned elements. So as we look at first the 2 northern corners, the northwest and the northeast, those earlier planning documents from the early 2000s only just focused on those commercial areas, those located near commercial centers of Barcroft. So what we wanted to do is essentially remove guidance from those documents and make sure that it lives in a more current version of the Columbia Pike vision, which is the neighborhoods area plan. And that will allow us to ensure a more cohesive approach to how all of Barcroft can be developed, how all of us in the future can continue to review it, and really just minimize any kind of conflicts, contradictory language. So in this earlier plan that does emphasize and prioritize the commercial aspects of the corridor, we're simply going to be adding notes that say guidance for Barcroft now lives elsewhere. And that would be throughout the document a reference to go look at the 2012 area plan that will now speak to the entirety of Barcroft. So in that plan, those of you that are less familiar, there is a lot of guidance because of the neighborhood or the residential portions of Columbia Pike, which are much more significant in size than the commercial ones. So with Barcroft, we not only entered into the more clearer guidance in terms of the street connectivity, but also open space expectations, land use, building height, density. So this is kind of a summary slide of all the different things we opened up through this analysis and now need to update as we've kind of come to some recommendations on what the MFDP needs to do. And this now you can see here on the 2 different edges, previously excluded guidance on those commercial areas here and here, because they were already spoken for in that earlier planning guidance. Those will now be codified in the neighborhoods area plan to make sure that whoever is interested or needs to reference these, they can go to one single document. So as we look at the open space vision, on the left, you can see the current version of the neighborhoods area plan, how it speaks to the general Barcroft vicinity. And then on the right, how that same information and the same legend would then be reconfigured to essentially mirror what the MFDP is proposing. And here you can see the minor adjustment. I'm going to keep highlighting it, how those commercial corners are now basically part of the new exhibit, whereas in the past they were kind of whited out and essentially voided. So that's a flavor of the open space guidance from a urban design perspective, the building heights and transitions, all those different colors that you see here represent a certain height category, and how in some cases there's a pretty significant depth to that height, and in some cases it's very shallow, given the type of transitions that are expected between the redevelopment edges of the property and the interior preserved areas, which sometimes very quickly have to transition from anywhere from 14 to 10 to 6 to 3 stories. And of course, grade has a lot to do with this, particularly in areas of the western edge, where we don't have conveniently streets providing a cushion and barrier to help with that transition. That becomes a slightly easier exercise in the Northeast. And I think the MFDP smartly takes advantage of that network to make this a little bit more feasible. And then finally, the other key element is transportation, which in this case captures both vehicular and pedestrian and bicycle elements. And this will similarly be mirroring what the comprehensive plan elements also need to reflect as we update the vision for Barcroft and bring in those 2 commercial corners. So this, of course, these series of exhibits will be accompanied by additional narrative. So as we get into late June or early July, you'll start to see what those plan addendums look like for Columbia Pike and allow us to capture this process. And then finally, although not as helpful because it doesn't really regulate anything, but kind of a general illustrative plan, which many of these plans tend to have. What if one way of redevelopment that could be envisioned? This will also be updated to reflect that guidance. So we spoke about the plan addendums, right? Those specific revitalization plans, area plans that speak to Columbia Pike's vision for growth. The other 2 elements that you saw in the earlier list involve the general land use plan and the master transportation plan. Because those 2 documents go into enough detail, anytime we update the vision, we also have to update these. So in the general land use plan, what you'll notice is that the balancing act and a delineation from where redevelopment can occur and where preservation is envisioned is codified here by the distinction between the various notes. So note number 8 was that reference to the commercial planning efforts from the early 2000s. Note number 24 is that more recent planning guidance in the neighborhoods area plan. And note 24A is really the delineation of where preservation is envisioned. So these maps will be updated to reallocate and redraw those lines per the current MFDP and where our land use process has ended up. The street network that's shown in the white lines behind this will also be updated, which we'll get to in the next slide, as will the black triangles, which are the open space, future open space designations, generally identifying the location of where future parks will be located. So again, I would consider these somewhat administrative in nature, but they do have to be updated if we are updating the other policy documents. And then similarly, on the MTP side, street network is shown here. You've seen other parts of the county where I think that blue striped hatch is simply shown without the street network behind it, and essentially just indicating that future streets will be delivered with redevelopment. In this case, because the regulatory form-based code language and its maps go into much more detail and have specified exactly where the streets will be and what cross sections they'll have, we did have enough information to provide this level of detail in the MTP. So, but because we did, we created more work for ourselves. So now we have to update that map, remove some streets, add some other ones, reallocate them. But simply at this stage, we're identifying where they need to be. The second half of the year, we'll dive into exactly how wide should they be, what is their exact cross section. So we're not solving that today or this month, but it is something we're going to bring back probably by the winter. And then finally, on the other MTP front, the bicycle facilities, a number of different reclassifications of the network, realigning it, and making sure that we can rely on existing and planned connections that incrementally will be delivered over the next few years, if not decades. So the last set of slides deals with what happens after July, at the current schedule that we're on, but following the county board consideration, Giant Lynch will be filing another use permit, this time for new construction. So far, we've only looked at renovation use permits. This will be for the first new project that will be delivered. And that will start a review that is likely to conclude in January of 2025, at which point the county board will consider that use permit. But in order for us to do that, Neighborhoods Form-Based Code, which is the regulatory document allowing that review to occur, also has to be amended. So we're going to be bringing those documents together at the time of the new construction application and complete the process change for the GLUP and MTP maps. So in July, we're only advertising them. It will be at this point in the winter timeframe that they will be officially amended together with the package of other actions. One of the things that probably isn't as highlighted throughout the work you've seen so far is another element of study that will occupy a significant portion of our time in the fall. And that is the Doctor's Run analysis, which is that tail portion of the property south of George Mason Drive. Two segments of that stream kind of continue to run through the Barcroft apartments. And one of the things that we're doing with the help of Giant Lynch and VICA is to really carefully reassess what the impacts of that stream are, given how close parking and existing buildings are to its edges. So as we review that information and recognize that it really does require a separate process in itself, we're going to be coming back at some point in the near future with some additional guidance in terms of what we've learned, what the analysis shows us, and help confirm whether or not what we have learned really impacts anything in the MFDP. So that right now is kind of a outstanding item, and we've recognized early that it won't be concluded in July, but it's something we'll be monitoring through the rest of the year. Our staff contacts, and I think that should do it. Staff's presentation. Stop sharing.
Okay, excellent. And I believe we have a presentation from Giant Lynch as well.
Yes, it's, sorry, I don't have 40 slides for you all, and not much of a presentation, but just, wanted to highlight a couple of things that Olivia and Matt just articulated. Again, Lauren Riley with Walsh Colucci, we're Land Use Council for Giant Lynch. We've got David Hildy in the room with us tonight and Greg Ward online from Giant Lynch as well. Staff just gave you all a very thorough presentation of where we've started with that historic acquisition of Barcroft Apartments, where we've been, especially over the past couple months with the working group. And then now, as our team is working to finalize the master finance and development plan, and staff is working on those changes to the county's comprehensive planning policy. I did want to touch on the renovation use permits that we've been working on, kind of seemingly in the background, but really want to bring them to the foreground over this past year. We've been able to process for renovation use permits for, as Ms. Sontag said, over 350 apartments. And so these use permits will preserve not only the affordability of those units, but also will preserve the historic buildings and the grounds themselves. And perhaps what I think the community is more interested in is the interior renovations to the buildings that will come with new fixtures, appliances, as well as end unit washers and dryers. So all of this will allow Giant Lynch to create some near-term improvements while we work on this kind of overall master finance and development process. And that is what we've all been quite focused on, especially the first half of this year with the working group. Our team has really appreciated the feedback that we've received over the past couple months with each of those meetings with the working group. And we feel we've been responsive to the feedback so far. And what you see in the draft plan is a result of community input, input from other commissioners within the county, as well as staff input. So it's been a collaborative process, and we're pleased with the outcome. We think the plan we have here stitches together the fabric of the existing historic Barcroft as well as new urban development. It creates and enhances connections throughout the Barcroft site, both be it for pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicles as well. And so we believe overall this plan will enhance the Barcroft community, and it will really create a sense of place here. So with that, we're excited to move forward and to implement this vision, and our team is available for questions.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's do this. So I'm looking at the clock. It's almost 7:50. So a couple, yeah, didn't do too bad. So as far as discussion, I've got a couple of proposed topics, and then we're going to go around the table as well as the virtual table. So I'm proposing we start with process questions. What I mean by process questions is any top line questions about how this is sort of coming in for landing as far as the request to advertise and process, right? Massing, preservation / architectural elements, streets and transportation, open spaces, and then I also wanted to put one down for public engagement because that was a very integral part of this process, in my opinion. But if other folks have topics they want to add, chime in now.
Sorry, you said streets.
I said street / transportation. Is that adequate?
Yeah, and at some point I put a comment or a question about the map on 32, but that could be catch-all on slide 32.
Well, let's do that. Let's do that under streets and transportation.
Sounds good.
Okay. Anyone online? Any other agenda topics? Going once, going twice. Okay. So let's start with process questions. Do folks have any kind of top line process questions? I have a few, but go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jill Barker with Park and Rec Commission. When you were going over the slide about the MFDP development plan, you talked about what the county was going to have to. And within that, we talked, one of the four was the open spaces. And the words intent and might were used with reference to some of those commitments. So, well, with reference to the describing of those things would be. So I was wondering if there really is going to be a commitment that the county, approves in terms of tree canopy, number of acres of open space, things like that. So it's a process question.
Sure, I can start with that. Do you recall which slide that was?
It was the one after the planning principles.
Okay. Yes, so the intent here is that these are the elements that are going to be captured within that MFDP document. In the second half of the year, we'll be implementing all of those into some of the policy documents, and where things might not live in those policy documents, they might get implemented through condition language for new development or for other use permit projects. So the idea is that this is establishing the vision for the property, and then we will take that as we move forward in the second half of the year with actually getting those documented into existing policy.
Okay, so the July decision is not the commitment, if you will, it's the vision, and then the commitment comes. So it's a legal commitment.
Essentially, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. So I'm pretty sure I know this, and it was referenced. Melissa had mentioned it previously as well, but the inclusion of the Penske site. So that is officially sort of part of all this now, as far as these planning principles. Before I know before it was sort of separated, it was part of the acquisition, but it was not necessarily fully included. But at this point, it is as part of the site as any other part of the site. Correct. That's a recent change. Okay, clarified that.
Just asking, is that residential also, or is that some other use? that particular.
Yeah, they'll be primarily residential with some, commercial opportunities typically.
Which I look forward to because its current state is definitely not residential. It's a lot of construction equipment sitting on it right now. And then the second one is, this is for staff, and I think this is probably for Melissa, maybe for you. But how do we, respectfully, I have to ask this question, but how do we, and maybe this is part of the original acquisition and the county's role in that, but how do we make sure we go through this whole process, right? We've got the MFTP, then we're gonna have all these amendments, and then a decade goes by and, development world, people get acquired, things change, things happen. How do we make sure that this community stays like one Barcroft? I know one of the concerns in the past was, it might get chopped up if somebody else bought it or whatever, right? And the victory here, in my opinion, was that it remains one community. I think that's been a lot of integral to the planning effort, right? Is to say this will be one community and how do we make things kind of align with one another? How do we, from a county perspective, how are we ensuring that this remains kind of one Barcroft, right? Because for it to be separated, and you guys are not suggesting this, but we have to future-proof everything. How do we ensure that that doesn't happen? Because the open space here affects this, and it's not a collection of pieces. It is sort of, in my vision, my opinion, one kind of community, right? And that's the only way that it works, is kind of a one comprehensive, cohesive community. That's very long-winded. But what do we have maybe legally, or maybe it's in the documents, as far as how we, assisted Gyre Lynch?
Yeah, I would say how to ensure that it, remains a cohesive community is exactly by going through the process we're doing now, which is the Master Financing and Development Plan really does outline the vision that's intended for Barcroft. And then there are certain policy changes also that are going to occur in, the GLUP, the Neighborhoods Area Plan. And so everything will be, the vision and the intention will all be codified in that. And then furthermore, just in terms of the affordability, there are affordability covenants for 99 years on the entire property, and that wouldn't change if the property does, go through different ownerships. But, I guess I would say it's exactly what we're doing here with the Master Financing and Development Plan.
Can I ask a question about the covenants? How do they run? Do they run through the deed?
The covenants are for 99 years. It started when the property was acquired by Gyre Lynch in December. So 99 years from December 2021.
So if it's ever sold, the deed has that covenant in it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes.
All right. I'm gonna, David, do you have a question on that?
I guess this is still process.
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I kind of look at this meeting as sort of a linchpin or a turning point in the process, as we've had the meetings all winter and spring. I just wanted to say I thought it really, really worked well, and it's to the staff's excellence, to the co-chairs' diligence and capability of managing something so complex with so many people, and to Gyre Lynch. I think I really was very, very happy with the kind of dialogue we had, with the mutual respect and with the way you listened, and you see every time we went through, we saw little changes coming up as a result of people's comments. That inspires confidence, but also creates momentum to do more, which to my next point, just to indulge me for a minute, on vision. Very few communities have an opportunity to do what is happening with this project. 63 acres of space in a dense community like this. A lot of money. It sounds like maybe not enough to do the things that are already lining up on the table, but compared to the potential, the spectacular potential, a gem in Arlington. I think I said in the first meeting, this is the garden apartment equivalent to Penn Place. Always exceed to the highest point, the highest visions you can have on everything, on all decisions, because the potential is enormous. And the pride that Arlington would have, and the pride that residents would have, and everyone else would have, is worth every bit of that effort. And it'll end up on the digital cover of urban planning magazines if you can do the kind of job that's possible here. And that's not a lot of little details always. It's more about that first cascade of vision to how that shapes what you do with the space and how you get into these, connect with all those suggestions that people had all along as to what it actually looks like on the ground and how you get from here to there. So I won't belabor that point. I got a few other things for later, but I just want to say the expectations, you can't have expectations that are too high for this as far as how amazing it can be as a place to live. You've got, it's the trifecta of history, affordable housing, public housing, not public housing, affordable community housing, and natural space. That's where good housing has come from, and that's where good housing is going with, and good communities are going with the, as the president of the American Institute of Architects said in 1990, whatever it was, sometime 10 years ago, said that biophilic design is the paradigm shift for the 21st century. This is where we have to go. And if we don't want to do it because we believe nature is good for you, we have to do it because controlling carbon emissions won't make enough of a difference in the next 100 years to go it by itself. It sounds like a threat, it is. So we need nature to make places livable. And I'll come back to that theme later on.
I think we'll move towards massing. This was, I think, really into our meeting on urban design and the working group. Do any folks have questions on the urban design or massing? Really, I'm thinking about the new development property.
Yeah, it's not so much, I think the heights and massing are appropriate where it's being pushed around the side, and preserve the center. So I think that's great. I think one question I have is, I'm not quite sure if I'm looking at the maps, look at the northwest corner of the site, that's where Columbia Pike and Formel Run meet. The street was realigned there a few years ago, and there's now just a parking lot there. Is that part of this also next to the, because there's the commercial structures on Columbia Pike, and there's where the new street was put through, and then there's sort of just this parking lot.
Talking about like
On the western side of.
Yeah, on the
Yeah.
western side, that's county owned.
County
It's
owned.
county
property.
Yeah, these
Is
two.
there any plan or for dealing with that? Because what, I mean, county owns it, but it's parking. Why is that there?
It's underneath the high tension transmission lines. So it's really hard to do anything with it. I mean, I should let staff answer. But every time, as
questions for
the
Kristen.
president of a civic association adjacent to that spot, the question has been asked in various conversations that I've been in, and the answer every time is look up. But I'll shut up and let staff actually
Okay,
answer.
yeah, because it just strikes me as wasted space.
I think that had, well, maybe, I don't want to pick on Kristen, but I think, I feel like we talked about that in the working group that came up in the context of, enhancements to the trail or the trail, because it's obviously right next to the trail.
Yeah, so happy to
You're on
high
mute.
level.
We can't hear you.
You're on mute, Kristen.
It's kind of coming in and out.
I'm not muted.
We got it.
Okay.
Yep.
Odd. So let me collect myself. So at a high level, we have had some conversations with Jared Lynch about the potential for the site. We all kind of agree that right now at the high level we're in, it's not kind of a piece of this larger visioning process. There will be need for connectivity from 4 Mile Run Minor to the WNOD for the bike infrastructure that's being planned. So that will be taken advantage in some way, shape, or form. But we really kind of look at that as a future opportunity to think about what needs might arise in the future, but not really as a component of the larger MFPD for Barcroft.
Okay, that's fine, but I would just hope that we have some sort of public process that could do a vision just for that. I think the community, again, I don't live there, so it's not I don't have a dog in the fight, but I would think that their communities would be interested in doing something like that.
I have a dog in the fight, literally in my neighborhood. I mean, that and our civic association actually had gotten involved because there were cycling, it was a parking lot.
Right.
And I actually think the county has done a great job in kind of, I would say, cleaning up that area. There's been food trucks and there's been
Right.
things last few years. So I think I feel strongly about giving the county the benefit of the doubt on this one. I think that they've definitely shown good faith in that site. And so I think we can have good confidence.
And that's
Yeah.
fine. I just wanted to make sure that it had in fact been raised and being thought about.
I think the other issue is that there are other entities that have dogs in that fight that don't come to our tables, right? Like the owner of the easement. And so it's of the easement for the high tension lines, right? So there's a lot of coordination that has to happen alongside a division. Eric and I both agree with you. There's a better use for that site than the status quo.
Yeah, just a whole lot of asphalt, that just doesn't seem to fit with everything else we're trying to do for that whole area.
Are you thinking of something developed or?
I'm not. I don't have an agenda for it other than, is asphalt really the best use? That's
Right.
my only point is that.
Because across Columbia Pike, there is a little mini park with a place that kids can learn how to ride their bikes. It's like a little village.
Oh, yeah, it's really nice. And that just was redone a few years ago.
It's under the lines too. And there could be some kind of little mini park there just so you don't have to cross the Columbia Pike for everybody to have access.
It also, this is the closest you'll ever hear me come to a pro car infrastructure talking point, but it also serves as a parking lot for the 16Y. So there's an extent to which, and that's all I'm going to say, there is an extent to which, right, there are car trips east of Columbia Pike that are east of that parking lot that aren't happening because parking lot exists. I'm gonna have to take a shower when I get home.
Don't worry, we're going to talk about transportation in a second. Well, it's not a question. I think we'll probably move on from massing because I'm not seeing any questions and I'm not seeing any hands raised. And I don't think we have anybody on the phone. I just will kind of say, and I said this in the working group, but I'll say it again. I really like how the massing and the redeveloped area sort of came out. It's one thing to look at this in the map, but you walk around that site, especially on a nice hot sweaty day like we got now, up and down the hills, really challenging, especially along that southwestern node. And so it does make a lot of topographical sense in my view to do it the way you're doing it. Ideally, do you put everything up on Columbia Pike? Probably it's not possible. We don't know, Giant Lynch doesn't own all the land, right? And there are other challenges associated with that. And we need to make sure we mix the preservation with enough density, right, to fulfill these commitments and the other things we want to do. So it makes a lot of sense. It relates to transportation questions I have later, certainly because we have to be thinking about 4 Mile Run minor. But I just personally want to say I think it makes a lot of sense what we're doing there. I think one thing for the community is folks, when they hear form-based code, are used to seeing the 5/1 or, and they're going to be much taller, if this actually goes through, and I hope it does, right? We might sing 12, 14 stories on 4 Mile Run, and the valley.
Right
there.
across the street, there's.
No, of course, there's the Brittany, right? There's the Brittany there, but I'm just saying, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just, it's a public conversation, right? Folks have to get used to. Did you have a question?
I do
Yeah.
have a comment
Okay.
about, and I assume this includes the architecture comment and whatnot without trading on the SPR.
We can move right towards that.
Okay.
addition into that.
I wasn't sure if those
No,
were
go ahead.
separate items.
Nope.
I think, I'm a little bit concerned about the massing, particularly transitioning onto the neighborhood. And this goes back to a comment that Commissioner Berkey mentioned, which is this notion of continuity and inclusivity, or what was the word used? A cohesive campus aesthetic, right? And I think at the end of the day, these new buildings are inherently going to be different. But I think there are design techniques that we could apply and use to make them feel, right, of the same ilk. And it doesn't have to be mimicry. It can be, sort of reference. It's, here's the analogy, like the Argos, right? Like you keep switching the boards on them, right? Is it still Argos? You can use wider boards, but you can't use like cat fur, right? At that point, it becomes a completely different thing. So I'm just wondering, and on the illustration on slide 32, you can see that the person that did that illustration did a little bit of thinking on the archetypes that are there and how to transition those to a bigger scale, but still have a little bit of a similar or a certain affinity, you know, and I think a little bit of the donut shapes, perhaps, the height, the steps downs, the materiality, and this is getting into SPRC terrain. But I think, you know, the massing needs to be finessed a little bit more and understand that there is a certain opportunity of density along the pike. But, you know, I just think it's a little rough, and admittedly, it is a rough massing model. I just think this notion of cohesive campus needs to be sort of brought to the forefront a little bit more. And I think the impact on that is a little bit economic also. Like if people feel like, oh, that's the neighborhood we don't go to sort of thing, you know. So I just want to be really, really tuned in and sensitive to that sort of perspective and how design does impact, along with biophilic design, how it impacts the psyche and the, you know, sort of entire culture of the people that live in both the affordable and the sort of, because there are some market rates, right, also. So we want to create the opportunity, right, to that community to be seamless between the different sort of economic.
So I'd like to respond to that. I actually would wonder if staff wants to weigh in. So first off, there's not going to be an SPRC. So you can't say it here, because this is going to be,
all right,
because we're amending the form-based code. So there are no site plans, right? So that's sort of the whole point.
Okay.
So I'm going to allow it. But would love staff to maybe weigh in here, because this was part of the meeting that we had on form and design. I think, are you thinking about transitions with regards to the existing buildings, the preserved buildings? Is that your concern?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a campus, right? So it's difficult to narrow down because there's different aspects in different areas of the campus that we would talk about transition. Other parts, I'm a little bit concerned about the sort of donut aspect and the fact that the buildings on the campus don't sit on a plinth, right? And the new buildings are going to be on a pedestal or a base, right? So like you start to introduce these different things, and I understand those. I'm not saying they're bad, but you know, is there a design sensitivity that we can bring to the table that starts to create an affinity between that architecture and that urban and that density fabric, so that people don't feel like they're stepping into another neighborhood as they cross the street, or you know, it's just a higher level of sensitivity is really what I'm asking for. Is that?
No, it's fine. I don't know if staff or you know, Jerry Lynch, if anybody wants to respond, you don't have to. Any thoughts?
I could start.
I was sort of looking at you.
That is actually great feedback. And I think what I'm going to cover is mostly good news, in that despite us not having SPRC to get into these, what you're seeing on that slide with the isometric bird's eye views, it's really almost per the request of staff and other stakeholders. Like, we're struggling to visualize what these plan view maps are indicating. You know, can we see something like this, as rough as it is? And it is taking a leap in terms of the what if scenario building, because even into next year or next second half of the year, all we're going to get into is for maybe two sides of each building establishing a build-to line, much like Crystal City has right now. In some cases, maybe three edges are spoken for, but a lot of these transitions, I think, will be up for debate, will be under review by staff. And in the particular, in the cases along Fomar Run, that western edge where you have the immediate transition to the existing buildings, the form-based code does require in those sensitive areas to review and respond to feedback from the HLRB, because those adjacent two zones are just as critical as the preserved zones. Where I think we'll have probably less of an opportunity for feedback is like on the northeast corner, where we have, working to our benefit, a little bit of grade, planned or existing streets, and some additional guidance that already lives in the code that speaks to some of the architecture elements and the transitions that are expected. But still, each building will have its own review process moving forward, so that should help us.
And that includes going through the org.
Yes.
You know, I would just add, like, you know, I appreciate the feedback and agree with your point of, you know, we also want this to feel like, you know, a village, right? And so, yeah, they made, you know, Matt may have split those in there, but those are not. I tried to keep them out. No. So, no, but just to like, yeah, those are not design buildings. We haven't gotten design on these buildings. It's just purely give it, you know, simplified. I know.
Perfect.
But I think that point is well taken. Of yes, this is a unique opportunity. As David said, you know, it's just the opportunity to do something and really feel cohesive with the architecture.
Commissioner Weir and then
A follow-up and then a new question. The follow-up is that just because there's no SPRC, these are still not administrative use permits that these new buildings would be coming in under, right? So it would still come to not just the OG, but to the commissions, at least to planning, likely to transportation where, where it's relevant. And then the board ultimately acts on the use permit. It's an important, there's not an SPRC, but there's still a public process. And I know, Mr. Matuzik, you said that, but I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page as to what.
Yeah, it won't be the,
process involves.
it won't be the entire roadshow you typically see with site plans where Parks and Rec, transportation, and, C2E2, for example, have their opportunity, but certainly the Planning Commission and County Board. But that kind of sets us up and explains maybe the rationale behind the second half of the year where we spend so much time getting into so many little details. Because if we do our job right in the second half of the year, so much of it will be spelled out in terms of exactly what we were expecting, what we want to see. The form-based code almost eliminates the possibility of that type of a dialogue where we are still negotiating even at those late stages, or so much could still be up for debate. There's really going to be only a handful of ways to meet the guidance we're going to develop by the end of the year.
Well, I wouldn't say that it eliminates the possibility of it. I would say that it is a substitute for it, because the form-based code is the public process, and or at least is a significant form, a significant chunk of the public process happened in the development of the form-based code, and then in what we're doing and what we're doing next.
Right. So, for example, the 2012 neighborhoods area plan took 4 years to develop. We're not just throwing it out simply because one site has to be updated. There's a lot of guidance that will still remain valid in that document that we took 4 years to develop and get the buy-in from the community. So that's still going to continue to rely and maintain.
Yeah. So the thing that gives me the most unease, really the only thing that gives me any unease, continues to be streets, right? And to the extent that anything I've been latching onto it in my conversation.
Hold on. I'm going to stop you there. Do you have an architecture?
Yeah.
All right. Let's just pause that because we're about to get to transportation. And then we'll keep.
I read too much into your recent note that we were about to get into.
Yeah. So let's go, Mr. Howell, and then we'll do streets.
Yeah, no, I just want to say, I think this point is extremely important. I think there were a couple of meetings where something along those lines was discussed in the extended working group about the, what do you call it, what do you say, aesthetic transition or something. So I want to just put on the table, because I actually spent 2 semesters in architecture when I started college, but that was 1966. So yeah, I'm not, but I'm wondering whether it might be possible to be a little creative with the facades, maybe even about how the new construction relates to the conservation areas versus on the other sides, how they relate to each other and to the outside. Almost everybody builds a building that looks pretty much the same one side to the other historically. Not always. Sometimes there's a directional orientation that matters in terms of how things look. But in this case, I'm wondering whether to sort of fit in with the larger community, you might be able to have one look along 4 Mile Run or Columbia Pike, but then as you come around the corners with a little soft transition, you get into a little bit different look that is much more compatible and feels like the existing community. And that wouldn't give people sort of form of cognitive dissonance if it were done right. I think that you might sort of be able to have it both ways in a sense. And also in terms of the form, the materials, things, just kind of make that connection regardless of which way you go. So you know, I just think it's worth taking a look at as a possibility because it will counter that sense. I think that Leah was, you know, when you walk around in there, you don't want to just go, oh, this is so nice. Oh, and look up and look, you know, and I think you can dissipate that reaction easily. It might be also a little bit of step back, or it might be, I mean, I know right now we just have the virtual blocks in there, and I know you haven't gotten to that level yet, but as you get started, I think that's worth taking a look at how that could be done. That's
Excellent. All right. We're going to do streets and transportation.
Yeah, so I remain concerned about, to the extent that any of the internal private streets, for lack of a better term, are not part of the MTP, that there becomes, over the decades, whether by change of ownership or different, you know, dynamic inertia or anything, there becomes a situation where, once again, we have a significant difference between the standards for what users experience as a street in the rest of Arlington and within the site. And what do I mean by this ugly phrase, standards for what users experience as a street? What I mean is, if you walk through at dusk, you know, several of you have heard this rant, or even at the end of the day, if you walk through the site, you're going to see not a lot of lights. You're going to see a lot of parking. You're going to see something that looks like a street in the sense that it has a cross section and curves, but is a fundamentally different user experience than you know, 9th Street or Columbia Pike or 12th Street, or you know, any of the new streets that will have been built under the form-based code by, you know, 40 years out. And if a street's on the MTP, if there is, you know, if it's subject directly to the master transportation plan, if it's on the map, then, you know, it seems like any kind of use permit review, any kind of time a use permit is being looked at or asked for, it's going to be part of the checklist, is making sure that the cross section looks like what it needs to. But to the extent that we've got a lot of private streets going through this site, I don't know how we make sure that keeping those streets, the private streets that are still being experienced by the many thousands of people who live in Barcroft as streets, how we make sure that they are kept up to spec if they're not subject to easements or the other kinds of bundles of regulatory review and checklist processing and planning that happens when it is a publicly eased or owned street. I don't know what the answers to that are. I'm not posing answers. I'm just because the answers I propose would probably not be the ones that make the most sense. But that's where my one area of unease remains.
I share that question, so I'll align myself with those remarks. I would like to note the increased parking ratios that were in Ms. Sontag's presentation as well. I strongly support those, given what we heard from residents. That was a big thing that we heard in community engagement, and I think staff heard. I certainly heard. Speaking to residents was concerns about parking, and I think this site, personally, this is a comment, I think this site is much different than a lot of the other sites that we sort of see in these processes, because we have a lot of assets around it that are kind of immovable. We've got a trail and park areas, and then we've got, you know, George Mason and Doctor's Run, and then Columbia Pike. So it's sort of, in some ways, on an island as far as parking. And we have a situation where, unlike a typical redevelopment where it's like, where a lot of new people are going to come in, but they can also vote with their feet, and there's kind of a lot of fluidity to the population. You know, one of the goals here is for folks to be able to stay who currently live here, and that's one of the biggest things they've said is parking. So I just want to put my thumb on the scale and say I strongly support the increased parking ratios. I think that makes a lot of sense given that area. And if you spend any time walking around, it quickly dawns on you that that is going to continue to be a large need, going forward. I do have a question, and then if you want to weigh in. I think this is for Kristen. I can't recall if we actually spoke to this in the working group, but is the county currently considering any kind of enhancements to signalization, anything at Columbia Pike, and then where 4 Mile Run Minor turns into Buchanan? I know in site plans, for example, like the county may carry an easement for a lane, like that is a very challenging intersection already. That will be much more challenging, if we presumably get a lot more density online, a lot more new neighbors. So would the county consider any kind of modifications down the road, like left turn lane or left signal, things like that?
So I will just say that there's nothing that we're looking at right now. We did just kind of finish that portion of the Columbia Pike multimodal improvements. But that's not to say that in the future or when an MMTA is done, that we wouldn't look at what that intersection needs from a total, capacity perspective, both from vehicular, pedestrians, cyclists perspective. I think that is not something that at this phase of the project we'd be identifying, but it'd be a follow-on step when implementation or in 10 years if the intersection needed to have a new approach to how it's managed. That's much less a long-range planning question as is a time and place.
Sure. I think it's something to consider long-term, given kind of the pressure that we'll be putting on that intersection. Of course, I'm not going to get into all the things the county is doing on the other end of that, which is George Basin and 4 Mile Run. Certainly, you can look that up online if you're curious what's going on down there.
And let me just say the multimodal improvements, their forecast year was far enough out that it assumed a lot of redevelopment along Columbia Pike. So any improvements in signalization, because a lot of these signals have been redone with that project as well, anticipated continued development along Columbia Pike. And the MMTA will look at that intersection if there's significant improvements that are needed to help accommodate the Barcroft development. That's something that would be identified then.
I'll go into Commissioner Tommy and then Commissioner Weir.
Yeah, a couple things. I also don't have a problem with the increased parking ratio, partly because a lot of the people who live here or will be living in Barcroft are not necessarily using the buses to get to National Landing, downtown DC, Roslyn. Jobs are all over the area, and they're not really on the transit system. So there probably is that real need there. So I have no concern about that. The bicycle component, I very much support. Having walked around that area, I was struck by the amount of bicycles just parked outside the buildings. And it isn't just little kid bikes, which are great to see also, but there's a strong bicycle culture there, it seems, which means I would like to very much hope that when we do increase these new bicycle streets, that at least the most significant ones have some sort of bicycle facility built along them rather than just a sharrow. If it's at all possible, have some sort of really true bike lanes. That's not going to be on Columbia Pike. I know that. I know that George Mason's being rethought, and I think there is supposed to be a bicycle facility built there. But within it, some of the larger streets, if they could have safe bicycle lanes, or somehow be able to create that, because this is a real component for this area.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just weigh in there, I do believe that bicycle facilities are being contemplated on George Mason now as part of that work. And then in the working group, we did have a lot of discussion about what is currently called 12th Road and its extension across George Mason, adjacent to the Penske site. There's the unfortunate situation of private ownership of Quebec Apartments to ultimately, hopefully connect 12th at Quincy. It's my neighborhood. I should know these streets. So that would obviously be ideal. You take 12th, much further. So anyway, are there any other comments on streets or transportation? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Weir, then Commissioner Sarli.
So two things. One, I'm not raising this as my capacity as president of the VSCL, but I am aware of it in part because having been, because of having been involved in VSCL that long. And so it's almost more Ms. Calkins and Mr. Gibson for your benefit, but the increased number of anticipated car trips, especially to 1.0 ratio for the cabs, which I also support, is going to make the situation on Buchanan rapidly untenable. And the existing treatment of intersections at Buchanan has got to be changed. It's got to be changed now, but that's a different conversation. This level of density along 4 Mile Run Minor, and we've talked about the streetscape issue along 4 Mile Run Minor, so it's a tangent to that. This level of density along 4 Mile Run Minor, which becomes Buchanan, is going to be a major problem for the other Barcroft in the room. That is not something that is dealt with in this document, which is partly why I say Ms. Gibson or Mr. Gibson and Ms. Calkins, this is for you, but I have to flag it knowing about it.
And if I can enter, I mean, and I weighed in because, you know, Daniel and I both live over there, right? And where it intersects, there's a lot of traffic already kind of going north and south along Columbia Pike there. And if folks from Barcroft neighborhood are trying to go east on Columbia Pike, that's going to be more and more of an issue. And we want to be mindful of our pedestrians who are crossing, right? There's no dedicated signalization right now. So
it's a situation that's got to require looking to places like 16th Street or 8th Street through Alcova where you're using roundabouts or something other than. But that's I promised, or I mentioned that I had a comment about slide 32. This is the updated map. I think that, you know, I think it would be appropriate with respect to this to acknowledge, to more clearly acknowledge some of the changes that we know are going to happen within the Barcroft Apartments area. Like this updated, this version on page 32 still suggests the retention of the archway. And like where we know there are going to be changes that are inconsistent with what we're showing, at least on this space. I'm not asking you to go and make sure that the Wellington is correct, you know, or to get rid of the update Fillmore, you know, Fillmore Gardens or the Fillmore, you know, like there are places where we know what the building footprint doesn't match this, but at least as respects to Barcroft, I think we should be as specific as it can be. I know it's illustrative. I know there are reasons to not be specific. So take it as a 2 sentence and maybe as a 3 sentence.
I'm looking online. I'm sorry, I was going to get Commissioner Sarli, and then I am just noting I'm looking online. I don't see any hands raised. So I'm going to go to Commissioner Sarli. Is there anybody in the chat?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to Commissioner Sarli, and I think we'll probably move on to the next topic.
So I just had some questions on South Taylor. Am I saying that street right? I lost the map here. The new little connecting piece that connects to Columbia Pike, is that going to be a signal intersection? It seems pretty close to the intersection of George Mason.
So again, at this time, that's not something that we'd answer. That's something that the MMTA would look at. I agree that it's pretty close. But that's what the transportation analysis in the future is identified for. We're at the high level comp plan phase, not at the detailed vehicle movement phase.
So I would argue against that a little bit, or at least put a check on the con side of the aisle, because I think you know, that stretch connecting to Columbia Pike feels a little bit grittish, and I know that this, you know, again going back to the cohesive, the campus design idea, I feel like it sort of straightens that edge a little bit too much, and this could be perception, but I think if we are going to stick with this Olmsted sort of park, picturesque, romantic landscape, you know, buildings sprinkled on the landscape idea, you know, we might want to also use that on the streets. And I know that that's counter to our sort of small grid, blah, 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 you know, but I think the campus here has a unique street pattern that we might want to try to be consistent with that. And I find that little, and the other thing is, that's a little bit of the node, you know, the central node of the campus that we see existing. And I'm not sure that we're gaining a whole lot, you know, by doing that sort of connection. Perhaps just a pedestrian connection would be really wonderful there. And I think there's a lot of connectivity going to the grocery store and all this other stuff that could be envisioned. I'm just not sure that it needs to be vehicular. Just putting it out there.
Well, could you all, or maybe Kristen, sorry. explain
So
why.
it does need to be vehicular, and I'll just emphasize if we want to go back to the MTP map that shows all of the connections that we'd anticipated when we anticipated less density on the site, we actually really need those relief valve connections for vehicles, for pedestrians, for bikes, for loading, so that not everything ends up at the intersection of South George Mason and 12th Road. You can see the number of just connectivity that wasn't happening. We're losing the what is South Taylor on this map connection. So we're replacing that with the other South Taylor. We're not getting the 11th Street connection anymore. We really don't want super blocks for vehicles either, because it creates a really big challenge, longer trips, and you load so many vehicles on one intersection that it becomes just challenging for the network as a whole. So that connection is really important for the network.
Okay, so taking that into consideration, then, perhaps we do a little bit of a curve on that, introduce a little bit of an S shape as we approach the pike, and push it towards Vunerf. And again, I know that traffic engineers are very set on their ways, that there's the things that work and the things that don't work. But I think, until that becomes something different, it's accepted lore, right? And I think it could augment that space, and it could augment that connection to the pike in a way that doesn't conflict. I mean, I'm assuming it's going to be a right turn only or something like that eventually, given the previous commissioner's comments about the north-south load on the street. So, a VUNERF or something that starts to sort of be in character with the rest of the campus, perhaps, even if it is vehicular. Agreed.
I mean, the elephant, I mean, I think you know this, Leo. I mean, the elephant in the room is that redevelopment that's right in the way. It's in the site. It's private, it's another owner. So that kind of limits our options, unfortunately. All right, I'm gonna move ahead because I don't see any other questions. We're gonna hit open spaces and then public engagement, and then we'll wrap things up here. So questions on open spaces, I see Commissioner Allen tell me, and then Commissioner Weir. And then Mr. Howell.
It isn't so much a question as a comment, and this actually goes to Doctor's Run. And I know we have we'll work on that, so that's good. I was a little bit wondering why it wasn't some of the first slides when we're going through the open space things, it isn't even mentioned. And yet it's a really pretty significant feature in this property. And so I see it as an opportunity that more can be done with that than what it is now, which is basically a culvert. The fact that it's one of the few daylighted streams in the county, which is, I think, really good. And I would want to expand that. Daylight even further up into the park along George Mason. It looks like that could happen without really losing anything. And instead of having it in a concrete box, open up the sides. That could cut into parking, so that's a consideration. But when I did walk that site, there's wildlife there.
Yeah.
There was a little snake I saw down there. It's real, and it's something that I think we should build upon rather than just try to ignore it or cover it up. Opening it up, I think, would be a really great opportunity for a lot of reasons, including flood control. Because when you have it like this, there's more space for water to go before it goes where we don't want it to go. So that's my comment on the open space, other than general more trees, make it more intentional, because right now it is a little bit ratty looking. And it could be way, way better than it is now. And I think you guys know that. We'll be dealing with it. So it's a comment rather than a criticism. So I think you get that. And the only other thing on open space, it isn't even open space, it's more of an aesthetic thing. On 4 Mile Run Minor, that stone wall really is gorgeous. And if there's some way that, since it'll have to go in some way or another, if it could be preserved or rebuilt as part of the larger, when those big towers go up. It's a really nice feature along South 4 Mile Run Minor, I think.
Where?
On South
retaining
Mile,
wall.
the retaining wall. It's this really good stone Aesthetically, I think it looks great.
I think it's near section 5, maybe.
Yeah.
I've never clocked it. I'll have to look.
Yeah, I mean, it just is a good feel. And it's just my own personal opinion.
Well, thanks for mentioning it.
Daniel, it's where you have 4 mile run, 4 mile run minor, and then the third iteration.
Oh, it's
a 4 mile
our,
run on top of it.
it's our 12-mile run section.
Right, yeah, there's that. Right, exactly, the road right above it.
It's also called.
That's also 4-mile run minor. Like the road above it is.
4 mile run tiny.
There are literally three
Three
cross
in a row,
sections.
yeah. Yeah.
I think on the doctor's run, we also saw some wildlife during our visit. Not all of it was
I
moving.
know, we got track
It was there.
We don't have bears in South Arlington, but we got.
Yeah.
We're working on it.
But I think the reason, to your first point, the reason you don't see so much of it in the presentation with the MFDP is because I think flood resiliency and other kind of regulatory aspects really need to be solved for first before we can come back to what we all consider as opportunities. And then really verify what options are really in front of us, available, can be funded. Then we'll kind of have an update likely in the winter, once we've solved the flood resiliency, given the RPA is there, and making sure that if we're going to be making that investment into the units surrounding it and the parking, that's in a good place before we can then leap to the other ideas. So,
But even identifying a plan or a vision, right? Even if it's not part of this project, right? Identifying what specific changes need to be made, right? Even identifying and getting adopted a plan or a vision enables the county to use that in seeking grant funding in finding opportunities to pursue it.
Exactly, a more natural doctor's run. A non-bricked over or
Right.
covered.
Like if we're saying we want to restore we want to actually, if part of the vision for this project, not a part that the applicant is on the hook to deliver, right? But an articulated vision for the neighborhood's plan is to restore and, to restore something resembling a natural, riparian, a natural, what do you call the channel? Something resembling a natural channel for the run. Then, then we have that when NIFWIF offers money to do something.
I think we all want to get there, but there are some very important, not even discussions, just regulatory analyses and modeling that's still in front of us. And I think what we've learned over the last few weeks, months, is that really takes a significant amount of time and review. Just within this body jurisdiction, there may be instances where national, federal agencies need to review that as well, given where we are in the property. So until all that is in a good place, I think it would be very difficult for Jaya Lynch to signal one way or another, and the county to signal, based on that information, this is the right course of action. Because again, the renovation investment is so high, we really want to make sure all that is in a good place and protect those units.
Okay, so what you're saying is we don't want to mess up being able to move forward on this because of some potential pitfalls by rethinking Doctor's Run, which I think we all agree in this room that it is an opportunity. But if we're too specific, it could very well stop since it's in.
Well, I think what's happening is
a lot of those buildings are in the zone.
They are, but I think to both your points, not signaling one way or another what the vision is specifically for Doctor's Run doesn't preclude us from either pursuing additional grants, because that's something we're going to just be on. We're going to be doing that every year, really, from now on, just beyond opportunistic. But it also doesn't preclude, I think, any potential outcomes in achieving certain objectives, because the analysis will still maintain a certain door of options that we can pursue.
I guess what we all want to do is just make sure that there is not going to be an option to deck it over.
That I would, right. At a minimum, I would want to see that we're not talking about decking it.
Right.
All right, you've been so patient.
So, I second all those things. And there's a fair amount of infrastructure grant money we're talking about for stormwater related stuff and ecology support. And that would be the right way to go. Wouldn't necessarily have to be under the umbrella of this project could be parallel. But definitely it would be worth it. And, you know, Doctor's Run just goes into 4 Mile Run down across the street. I've seen great blue heron, solitary sandpiper, quite a few other things just in that section next to the ball fields. So they're definitely going to come up as soon as it looks like it'd be a very important thing to do. And if that's the conduit, then to the entire property. So on the open space, when I was talking about the trifecta before, but the historic element is the connection to the open space is that this is the 1940s vision of a garden community. The 1940s vision of the garden community was great. It was actually lost in the 70s, I think, and 80s, but then but the 2020s vision is a little different because of the heightened awareness of ecology and biophilia. And so I just want to throw in 2 things quickly. And one is that while we are all concerned about tree canopy, and especially the willow oak on the corner of George Mesa and Columbia Pike, which is the jewel, it's like the symbol. It's as old as the whole place. But tree canopy is very important, but we know that some places that can't be preserved. But we also know that it's not the only thing. You can't just be trees and grass. The way to go now is reduce your maintenance costs, overall long-term maintenance costs, by pretty much using your lawn, your turf grass lawn for recreational and social areas, which are mostly flat. But on the borders of those and everywhere else that's got significant contours, plant it, understory trees, shrubs, along conduits, whether it's the biophilic corridors or grasses that don't need maintenance, prevent weeds, keep grass from needing to be taken care of, get in the way. Define spaces. So when we use, and I forget which slide it was, 21 or something, idea of biophilic corridors, that's good, but the whole place is going to be biophilic. Okay, and that's the vision. That would be the vision. And some of the spaces are designed for use by people, and some of them are designed to create an environment for people and wildlife that will benefit everybody. And that includes, when you talk about conservation gardening, it includes stormwater retention. It includes a larger coverage of peat island impact. And as I said before, reduces the areas that need maintenance, including leaf blowing, because the natural cycle just allows for all that. So maybe I'm preaching to the choir on that, but I don't think that the biophilic idea is the trimmings that you put on the tree. It's the inherent DNA of the space. And if you come at it from that approach, then all of the concepts, including who you select for landscaping, can be influenced by that. Yeah, I just think in this area, in addition to the other things we talked about, it's just an enormous amount of potential for this to be stellar and truly for a place that's 80 years old that's doing a lot of restoration, it can be cutting edge in terms of climate action because of the nature. And you know, if you put solar on the top of those new buildings, you might even be able to put solar on the facades of a few of them. Who knows how much? I don't know anything about that technology. It's worth looking at where they're sticking way up above the tree line. Go for it. You know? So I think there's potential with that too. Anyway, yeah, great potential for everything to do with nature there, and it's almost mandatory on some of the steep slope areas because you're not only fighting, people worry about runoff in terms of stormwater going into the streams, but just as big an issue, and we fight with it all the time in Arlington is soil erosion and sediment. You know, and that's a problem for the site it comes from as well as where it goes. So, you know, that kind of understory and ground level stuff captures that.
All right, so let's do I would take a time check. It's 8:47. So we're gonna wrap up open space. I got you. We're gonna wrap up open spaces, and then I think we'll do public. I don't know if you all public comment in the room. No.
I believe it's just fine.
Okay, just okay, great. Well, then we'll also do final remarks, and I don't.
We just got a hand up.
Were you here?
Yes.
Yeah, I just heard it through them.
Okay.
It's been fascinating.
I'm glad to have you. I remembered that the neighborhood you said was.
I have different.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I'm bringing this up at the right time, so I apologize. I think you'll correct me. But I just want to echo what David says about open spaces and natural areas, especially native plantings. Those are really important to Parks and Rec, and we want to be sure that that is somehow worked in as a commitment. And especially if we could get the list of the plants, we found that that's a very helpful way to be sure of what's happening. I'm also curious as to how we're going to deal with the when in the process we deal with the stormwater repercussions and make sure that we don't make erosion worse and that the trees that are being planted are going to be protected from erosion. And I'm also concerned about the maintenance of the natural areas. Want to make sure that that those are maintained, that there's provision for maintaining them into the future. So I don't know, is that a question that's appropriately asked now?
You can ask it. I don't know if you folks want to comment.
Yeah, sure. I'll take it. So the stormwater, ensuring, you know, that area is maintained and each project is taking on and dealing with its own stormwater, that will come with each use permit. So with these renovation use permits, they have included some stormwater improvements as necessary for the site. And then of course, with the new construction, they will have to follow the latest guidance from the county on stormwater retention measures. And then as far as maintenance goes, so David, you may be able to elaborate a little bit more, but as we start to incorporate these public parks and paths, they will all be maintained, but and it probably will be a condition of the use permit approval as well that those areas be maintained. But I don't know if you all have any idea about how that will be structured.
Yeah, and also just the we in the same concept of the resident amenity center. These are kind of shared amenities and infrastructure across all the renovations. So they'll be managed as one management and overseen. So there's not like, this owner over here in this phase isn't taking care of their parts. It's a shared maintenance throughout the whole thing.
Okay, so that's being thought about.
Yes, yes.
And then just another thing that Parks and Rec always talks about is with increased density, we already have way too many people trying to use the fields and the recreation facilities. And so it's probably not anything we could do anything about, but we do always have the concern about not having enough recreation facilities with the increased. I think that's about all I'll bring up right now.
I think real quick on that topic, what probably doesn't get noticed is that with the form-based code vision that we had in place, which anticipated a certain level of growth, we had approximately 1 acre of public parks that would be delivered if that vision would be realized. I think given slightly increased growth potential that's shown in the MFDP, we've increased that expectation for 1.3 acres of public space. So kind of recognizing to your last point that with additional growth, as additional users, to make sure we deliver additional spaces. So that's now reflected.
I mean, is it already set in stone that it's going to be casual use space versus, a field or something like that? Or is that open for discussion?
Right now, we're in the first stage. We're simply quantifying the general area and location. Next stage, which will be the second half of the year, is trying to kind of differentiate between kind of a small greener mini park and a more, activated and hardscape plaza, for example. Which of those two do we feel like the three spaces that are shown here should be? And kind of verifying and updating potentially characteristics that come with that label, one of those two.
So when do we get to comment on that?
So that would be the second half of the year.
Okay, okay.
And then moving forward, the final stage is when a redevelopment that's shown next to one of those spaces comes in, the use permit itself, that will trigger the final stage where we actually program and design it
Okay.
along with the building.
So we have a chance to bring this up again. Okay, thank you.
Get a quick comment.
Quick comment, just a plug in for that open space at the intersection of Taylor and 12th. I think that's sort of the heart of the site. So I would love to see a really special design and really special considerations for that whole open space and the way the building engages the space. And then I was remiss on the transportation bus shelters.
Oh.
I think everyone knows what that means.
It's 8:53, so what we're gonna do is I think we usually do final comments and then public comment, right? Yeah. All right. So if you'd like to make a final comment, we'll do that now. Speak in like 30 seconds though. I'm getting texts. My little one is melting down, so I need to head out soon. Priorities, people. So if you have a final comment you'd like to make, now would be the time to do so.
Bus shelters.
My esteemed co-chair on the working group.
I just want to thank people for participating in this evening and thank you to the applicant for the incredible work. I'll go backwards a little bit. My comment about streets, please don't interpret that as me questioning whether or not what you'll deliver now is fully up to spec. It's sort of a continuous process issue so that, future us's we are trying to make it more difficult for future us's to screw things up rather than worrying about what you're doing. But aside from that little aside, this has been a great project, and thank you to everyone. And thank you to Eric for everything that's been happening.
I'm just going to go ahead and say, yeah, I agree with all of those sentiments. I mean, this really started with several years ago, right, with Jair Lynch coming forward and partnering with the county. And we got Murray Randall and Melissa and Ann Venezia and everybody in the finance team who made this work, and Amazon who made this possible. We wouldn't be here without all those folks, right? So I feel like we're standing on their shoulders, right? And then this is incredible work by Matt, Olivia, and Melissa, and a lot of folks, Lisa, and a lot of folks behind the scenes, right? Natasha, always helping with our LRPCs, right? And all the work you do. And then all of our community members. I mean, this is so exciting. And as David was saying, there, you don't really get an opportunity to do this anywhere, really. A lot of places, especially Arlington County, right? So this is like so incredibly exciting. And so, yeah, all the critiques and whatnot, it's because we like to focus on that stuff. But we love so many things, especially at 12th and Taylor, how you all change plans and are giving us back that green space. And I concur with what Leah was saying. We're just very happy with the way that this has gone, and so we're very excited. So with that, okay, we're going to do public comment. We have one person
We have
online.
one in person, in person and one online, but I did ask in the chat if they could identify themselves, the person that has their hands up, so that I can actually put you on the list. But if you'd like, we can start with Mr. Benson.
Yes, we'll
He's
start
over
with Mr.
there.
Benson. We'll do 2 minutes.
All right, so let me just share real quick my screen. There's someone else that signed up.
Sarah,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Well, we're gonna pivot to Sarah because
I can't get my hand to go down. I'm sorry.
Oh,
That
okay.
was a fake out. I don't know what's going on. I appreciate the opportunity to participate, but I literally can't get the hand down. Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, so do you want to give it 3 minutes, 2 minutes?
We'll do 2 minutes.
2. Hold on, where's my 2? Here we go. So Mr. Benson, you want to start? I'm going to go ahead and turn this on.
Thankless job here being the last guy. So I'll be brief, as brief as I can. My name is Robert Benson. I'm a member of the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission. I'm speaking tonight on my own behalf. David is our representative. David and I have discussed what I'm about to say. Everything I'm about to say reflects what is called for in the new Forestry and Natural Resources Plan, which has ambitious goals and is a co-equal part of the county's comprehensive plan. So trees, et cetera, are just as important as housing, transportation, and the other elements of the plan. I think the current plan for Barcroft is extremely well thought out, has many tree and natural space elements you all been talking about. It's very welcome at a time when our trees are really in crisis in Arlington. Nevertheless, I've walked the site a number of times. I've followed the discussions in the work group, and I believe there's still opportunities to improve some specific elements of the plan to create an even better natural setting than what's called for. I realize this is not the venue for specifics, but I know it's going to the county board in July, and that's going to be kind of banging the gavel on at least the basic framework. So I want to be sure that 8 points I'm about to run through really fast are on your minds between now and July. So number one is to reiterate David's basic point. It's a lifetime opportunity for this site. And I think of it as like a mini arboretum. Really have a chance to create something nationally significant. So it's not just planting a lot of trees, it's thinking about it holistically site-wise. Number two, preserve the mature trees at the corner of Broken Pike and George Mason. They're brilliant, beautiful trees, a great signature for the site. Give enough space for them to survive the construction. Number three, move the mini park that's at the other, across the street on George Mason, move that 0.3 acres into the main community so that it's easily accessible to residents and a much better utilized spot. Right there on the corner, nobody's going to go there. Number four, look at 12th Street as an entrance boulevard. Look at it as a scenic tree-lined space. This gets to your point, Daniel. Let's make it attractive and safe for residents, with lighting and all. And you can really create something special. And in every courtyard going all the way up to Taylor Street, David's point, make every courtyard a little biophilic gem. You have a little mini park along the way. I think look at 12th Street as an entrance boulevard that's very desirable for residents and a real opportunity. Number five, preserve as many existing mature trees when you're renovating as possible, even the ones that are sort of in the middle ground. You can prune them, you can feed them. Every tree counts at this point. Our tree canopy is under crisis, so every mature tree we've got, we need to try to save. Design around them if you can to preserve as many as you can. Number six, where the landslide occurred, think about redesigning that to have tiers that have deeper beds for trees so that you can plant shade trees there and have resident accessibility to have that be really a green space that people can use. Not thin strips the way I believe the current design calls for it, that has nice plantings, but isn't really that shaded area that we need for this site.
I'm sorry, I have to I was like, okay, letting the timer go, but how many more points?
Two more.
Okay.
Number seven, really kudos to Jar Lynch for preserving as much of the existing mini forest, what I call mini forests. There's a big chunk that's still going to be lost to some of the buildings along 4 Mile Run. Figure out a way to work around that. That'll help stabilize the hill and need as much natural green space as possible. And number eight, for the bike lanes along George Mason, make sure that you still allow enough space for trees along that. If you need to plant in the front yards, do that. But George Mason needs to be a tree-lined boulevard as well, even as you're providing bike access along the road. Those are my points. Thanks for your kind attention. Appreciate it.
All right, we have one person online.
Yes, I did not hear back. Second, did anybody, let's see.
Excuse me, Natasha, it might be me. It's Alice Hogan.
Thanks, Alice. Go ahead.
I think there might be something wrong because Sarah can't put her hand down and I can't put mine up. So I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, did you have a comment?
I did. Yes, please.
Okay. Go
Is
ahead.
now a time?
Yes.
I just wanted to echo so many positive comments that were made, throughout the meeting and toward the end, just about what an amazing project this is. And I never want us as a group, as professionals, as a community to lose track of how incredible this is, what we've saved and what we're enhancing and what, low income and market rate, households will be enjoying for decades to come. It's quite remarkable. So kudos to everyone involved and to the commitment of affordability and livability, sustainability, so many of our values in Arlington. So that's first and foremost. I did have a couple of questions and I may have missed what you were saying about the park. That when I came to a couple of the working group meetings, I didn't hear anything, and now there seems to be a bit of a park or open space at a diagonal on the Penske site, and then there was also supposed to be something just west of there at George Mason and Columbia Pike, and I thought we were talking about how that might not be as useful so close to a big intersection. So I'm wondering, are both of those still planned for those two intersections? Are they active like parks, like with equipment, or what's envisioned for residents at those two corners? And then the only other question was, what about the retail on Columbia Pike? The furthest west, is there dialogue with those small businesses? Or I know that's something to the future, but is there any kind of vision for how to either invite those folks back or whatever you have in mind? I'd love to know where that stands. So thank you.
Thanks, Alice. I think those are questions that we can address offline. I think some of them have answers and other of those are sort of outside the scope. So I will, I'll be in touch with you. You're not a stranger, and can connect you with staff on that. But we are over time. So thank you everyone for attending tonight. Of course, thank you to Jair Lynch and county staff and everybody who's participated. So the next steps are going to be commissions. And of course, this will also come up with a commission in July. And with that, the meeting is concluded. Thank you.
Great job. I know you got the first one down.
Go, Eric.
Good
I think it's only gonna get longer.
That's your exit.
Yeah, I need to stop this recording. Where is it?
We got this. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you took over.
Okay.